Journey to Silius colonized its way onto your NES back in 1990. Developed and published by Sunsoft, Journey to Silius was actually originally created under the assumption that Sunsoft would continue to hold the lucrative video game rights to the Terminator franchise, and Journey to Silius was going to be their first Terminator game to market. Unfortunately, for whatever reason though, those rights were sold off to LJN, leaving Sunsoft with a Terminator game that they couldn't release to stores. But instead of shelving the entire product, Sunsoft decided to retool the game just enough to be able to release it as an original game, which is how we ended up with Journey to Silius sitting on store shelves. But was it enough of a retool to hide its Terminator skeleton underneath? Or did Sunsoft accidentally end up creating a genuinely fun original action game without needing Arnold's robotic visage plastered all over it?
I'll be back.
Well, grab your favorite top secret data disk left by a dead family member, because we're about to see if Journey to Silius is worth the trip. Start up Journey to Silius and you'll get to see one of the few things that Sunsoft actually ended up changing for the final game, that being a completely different plot that sorta fits into what you're doing. Essentially, you play as Jay McCrae, yes, that's his real name, not even being Cray, whose father was murdered by terrorists in an attempt to stop the colonization of other planets. Jay finds a data disk at his dad's house containing all of the colony plans, along with a request from his father to protect other, less destroyed colonies from the terrorists. It's just a shame you never get to ask him why the terrorists and colonies all look straight out of a Terminator game though, but I think we already know the answer to that anyway. After you're done setting course to the nearest space colony for revenge, go ahead and press start and get ready to blast your way across Silius. Getting into the game is about as simple as you'd expect, with Mr. McCrae being able to run, shoot, and jump his way around the 5 different levels on offer. The main thing that sets Journey to Silius apart from other games of this type is its persistent inventory of guns that you can choose from once you find them. Unlike most games where just finding weapons grants you its use until you die or use up its ammo, Journey to Silius gives you a new weapon toward the end of every stage that will then be selectable via the inventory screen whenever you need them. This includes your standard assortment of firearms like a shotgun that can shoot in 3 different directions, a homing missile that searches out targets, along with a few others like machine guns and lasers. Unfortunately, just because you have the ability to select them at any time doesn't mean you can use them constantly, as each gun besides your standard pistol relies on one single energy bar that's located just below your health. And since that bar drains pretty quickly regardless of what gun you use, most weapons will need to be saved for specific situations where they're useful, instead of just using them to blow past enemies whenever you want. Because, you know, that would actually be the fun thing to do with a selection of cool weapons. You can at least grab energy power-ups from dead enemies, but these can be completely random drops that don't show up too often, so you may either find yourself with a ton of energy that you don't even need, or absolutely none on the same stretch of stage. It ends up being an all-or-nothing gamble, which sadly means it's usually best just to use the standard pistol until you really need to use one of the other guns. I really don't mind draining energy for using the guns, but I kinda wish each gun used its own separate energy bar. That would have at least given me more options in what I could have used and when, but since they're all tied to the same energy bar, I was constantly conserving ammo, and ultimately not using the one neat gimmick that the game has. As mentioned before, Journey to Silius is only 5 levels long, and probably won't take you too long to make it through thanks to stage checkpoints and, thankfully, infinite continues. But what's on offer is actually pretty fun to shoot your way through, since every level offers a decent amount of variety in both design and enemies that populate them, with new enemies popping up in every stage, which is always a nice bonus. It's also obvious that Sunsoft wasn't too keen on changing their game at the last minute beyond the title and plot, as all the stages and enemies could essentially be straight out of any other Terminator game. Hell, some of the stages just straight up have endoskeletons as enemies. How's that for sticking it to the man? Each stage also comes with both a mini-boss and a regular boss, but the mini-boss always seems to show up literally right before you fight the stage boss for some reason. This usually means that you'll be draining whatever gun energy you have left on the mini-boss, making for some frustrating stage boss fights using only your crappy default pistol. It also doesn't help that your gun energy doesn't refill when you die, so even if you do get to the boss and continue, you'll still be stuck using your pistol to try and beat it. If you can learn to conserve some gun energy though, and master a few cheap hits here and there, Journey to Silius is still more than entertaining enough throughout to make up for these annoyances. At At the end of the day, Journey to Silius is a bit more interesting than what initial impressions may seem like. Taken by itself, it's a pretty fun action shooter that's a dime a dozen on the NES, with the only thing making it stand out among the dozens of other games in the genre being a persistent inventory of selectable weaponry. It's not exactly a very challenging or long game, but the action feels good and it definitely punches above its weight for a game that initially looks and sounds as generic as its title makes you want to think it is. But taking a look at it and knowing what Journey to Silius was actually supposed to be makes for a much more interesting game. If Journey to Silius would have come out as the Terminator game that it was supposed to be, then this would have been by far the best Terminator game released on the NES, or really any system, for quite a while. This would have been one of the rare games based on a movie license that would have actually done the source material proud, especially considering that this would have been an original take on the Terminator storyline that no one was even attempting at the time. Unfortunately, none of that came to be, and what we're left with is the biomechanical skeleton of that game with Journey to Silius. So if you get the chance, then by all means check the game out. It may not be as polished or as tight as the best on the system, but you still get a fun little action game that'll keep you busy for a few hours. And if you squint just a bit, you may realize you're playing the best Terminator game on the NES that never got released.